I was still holding the engraved watch when Tom Whitaker called me into his office. My team had just presented it to me. 20 years of service, 2 decades of loyalty. The metal felt warm in my palm as I walked down the hallway, thinking he wanted to congratulate me personally. Instead, Tom sat behind his desk with that smug little smirk I'd learned to hate over the past 6 months. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just slid a letter across his desk and leaned back in his chair like he'd won something. My heart dropped before I even read the first line. Effective immediately, I was being demoted, stripped of my title, moved to a smaller desk. My 20 years reduced to nothing with one piece of paper. I read the letter 3 times, hoping the words would change. They didn't. Tom watched me with that satisfied grin. His arms crossed over his chest. "It's just business, Allison," he said like he was doing me a favor. "Nothing personal." But it was personal. I could see it in his eyes. He enjoyed this. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that watch at his smug face. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my pocket. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "I understand," I said quietly. Tom looked almost disappointed, like he'd expected tears or anger. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not yet. I turned and walked out of his office, my chest burning with humiliation. The conference room was packed when Tom made his announcement. Every member of our department sat around the long table, coffee cups in hand, waiting for the quarterly update. I stood near the back, still clutching that stupid watch. Tom cleared his throat dramatically and smiled at the crowd. "I have an important announcement," he began. "After careful consideration, we're making some leadership changes." My stomach twisted. I knew what was coming. Allison Price will be stepping down from her senior analyst position, effective immediately. The room went silent. Heads turned toward me. I felt 50 pairs of eyes burning into my skin. Tom didn't stop there. "Her replacement will be Evan Carter," he continued, gesturing toward the 28-year-old sitting in the front row. "I'm confident Evan will bring fresh energy to the role." Evan stood up and shook Tom's hand like they'd rehearsed it. Probably because they had. Everyone knew Evan was Tom's golf buddy, his drinking partner, his golden boy. Evan had been with the company for less than 3 years. He didn't know half the systems I'd built. He couldn't explain the compliance processes I'd perfected. But none of that mattered. Tom wanted him there, and Tom always got what he wanted. The whispers started immediately. I heard them even though people tried to be quiet. 20 years. Someone muttered. "That's insane," another voice added. My coworker Brenda caught my eye from across the room. She looked horrified. I forced myself to smile, to nod, to pretend this wasn't destroying me from the inside out. Tom was still talking, but I couldn't hear him anymore. My ears were ringing. "My name is Allison Price, and I gave this company everything. For 20 years, I showed up early and stayed late. I missed my daughter's dance recitals because of budget meetings. I skipped family vacations to finish quarterly reports. I worked weekends, nights, holidays. I built the financial tracking systems that kept our department running smoothly. I trained new hires. I fixed Tom's mistakes when he was too proud to admit he'd made them. I was the one people came to when they needed answers. I was reliable. I was loyal. I was good at my job. And in return, Tom Whitaker stripped it all away in front of everyone I worked with. He humiliated me because he could. Because I was 52 and Evan was 28. Because Tom needed someone he could control, and I'd stopped being easy to control years ago. After the meeting, Evan approached me with fake sympathy plastered across his face. "Hey, Allison," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I just want you to know I have a lot of respect for everything you've done here." I stared at him. He was wearing the same tie Tom wore last week. Probably a gift. "I'm really looking forward to learning from you," Evan continued, like he was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I nodded politely. "I'm sure you'll do fine, Evan," I said, keeping my voice calm. He smiled, relieved, and walked away. Brenda grabbed my arm the moment he was gone. "Allison, this is insane," she whispered. "Everyone knows you should have his job, not the other way around." I squeezed her hand. "It's fine," I lied. "Really?" But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. That afternoon, Tom called me back into his office. I thought maybe he wanted to discuss the transition, to explain the reasoning behind his decision. I was wrong. He sat behind his desk, leaning back in his leather chair like a king on a throne. "I wanted to make sure you understood the situation," he said slowly, like I was a child. "This company is evolving, and we need people who can evolve with it." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. "You should be grateful you still have a job, Allison," Tom continued. "A lot of people your age aren't so lucky." Wait, there it was. The real reason. I wasn't young anymore. I wasn't shiny and new like Evan. I was expendable. Tom smiled that smug smile again, clearly pleased with himself. I nodded once and left his office before I said something I'd regret. I made it to my car before the tears came. I sat in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, sobbing so hard my chest ached. 20 years. 20 years of my life, and it meant nothing. I thought about my kids, about how I'd missed so many moments with them because I believed this job mattered. I thought about my husband, who'd supported me through countless late nights and stressful projects. What would I tell him? That I'd been replaced by a kid who barely knew how to use Excel. I cried until my eyes burned, until my throat was raw. Then I wiped my face, started the car and drove home. My husband, Marcus, took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked gently. I told him everything. He held me while I cried again, whispering that it would be okay. But I didn't believe him. That night, I stood in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My eyes were red and swollen. My face looked older than it had that morning. I barely recognized myself. For 20 years, I'd tied my identity to my job, to my title, to my success. And Tom had taken it all away with one letter. I thought about quitting, just walking away and never coming back. But then I thought about Tom's smug face, about Evan's fake sympathy, about the way they'd humiliated me in front of everyone. Something shifted inside me. A cold, quiet fury settled in my chest. I leaned closer to the mirror and whispered, "You will not take me down, Tom. Not like this." It was a promise. To myself. To my future. I didn't know how yet, but I would make sure Tom Whitaker regretted what he'd done. The next morning, I walked into the office with my head held high. People stared. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others looked away, embarrassed. I ignored them all and went straight to my new desk, a cramped cubicle in the corner, far from the windows I used to enjoy. My old office, the one I'd worked in for 8 years, was already being cleaned out for Evan. I watched as maintenance workers carried my things past me in cardboard boxes. It felt like watching my own funeral. But I didn't cry. I sat down at my new desk, opened my laptop and got to work. I had a plan forming, still vague but growing clearer. I would watch. I would wait. And I would learn everything I needed to know to destroy Tom Whitaker's career. Over the next few weeks, I became invisible. I answered emails. I completed my assignments. I attended meetings and said exactly what was expected. Tom barely looked at me anymore. To him I was finished, defeated, harmless. That was exactly what I wanted him to think. But while I appeared to be fading into the background, I was actually paying closer attention than I ever had before. I started noticing things. Small things. Tom's expense reports were always submitted late. His approval signatures on vendor contracts were sloppy and rushed. He cut corners on compliance paperwork, trusting that no one would check his work. But I checked. I started keeping copies of everything. Every late report, every unsigned form, every questionable decision. I organized them carefully in a private folder on my personal laptop, labeled innocently as Project Archive. My co-workers started coming to me with their frustrations. It started with Brenda, who confided that Tom had rejected her vacation request without explanation. Then Carlos mentioned that Tom had approved a vendor contract without verifying the pricing, which cost the department thousands. Another colleague, Diane, quietly told me that Tom had pressured her to backdate a report to cover up his mistake. They all trusted me. They always had. I listened carefully, taking mental notes of every complaint, every error, every shortcut Tom took. I never criticized him out loud. I never appeared bitter or vengeful. I simply nodded sympathetically and offered quiet support. But inside I was building something. A pattern. A trail of evidence that would be impossible to ignore when the right moment came. I just had to be patient. 2 months after my demotion, the company held its annual leadership dinner. Tom arrived in a new suit, laughing loudly, his arm around Evan's shoulders. They looked like father and son. Made me sick. During dinner, Tom stood up to give a toast. He bragged about the department's success, taking credit for work I'd done. He talked about his team like we were all loyal soldiers following his brilliant leadership. Then he mentioned the upcoming external audit. "Don't worry," Tom said with a confident grin. "We're in great shape. They're not going to find anything." He laughed, and Evan laughed with him. Several people around the table nodded, reassured. But I caught something in Tom's voice. A tiny edge of nervousness. He wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. I took a sip of water and hid my small smile behind the glass. The next week, Evan made a mistake in a client presentation. He'd misread the financial data I'd prepared and presented the wrong numbers to a major account. The client noticed immediately. I watched from the back of the room as Evan stammered and turned red. Tom jumped in to smooth things over, but the damage was done. After the meeting, I approached Evan quietly. "If you'd like, I can walk you through the reporting system," I offered politely. "It can be tricky at first." Evan looked embarrassed but nodded. "Yeah, that would be helpful. Thanks, Allison." I spent an hour showing him the basics, things I'd mastered 15 years ago. Tom walked past the conference room and glared at me through the glass window. I smiled pleasantly and continued teaching. I wanted Tom to see that I was still essential, that replacing me had been a mistake, that Evan couldn't do this without me. As the weeks passed, I became quieter, calmer, almost serene. People commented on it. "You're handling this so well," Brenda said one afternoon. "I'd be furious if I were you." Shrugged. "What's the point of being angry?" I replied. "It won't change anything." Tom noticed too. I saw him watching me sometimes, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He'd expected me to quit or fall apart. Instead, I was steady, professional, unremarkable. He started to relax around me, treating me like furniture. That was exactly what I needed. The more invisible I became, the more careless Tom grew. He stopped pretending to double-check his work. He signed off on documents without reading them. He trusted Evan to handle tasks that Evan had no idea how to complete. And every time Tom made a mistake, I documented it quietly and added it to my growing collection. 3 months after my demotion, the announcement came. Corporate was conducting a surprise external audit of our department. The email arrived on a Monday morning, and I watched the color drain from Tom's face as he read it. The audit would begin in 2 weeks. They'd be reviewing financial processes, compliance procedures, vendor contracts, and expense reports. Everything Tom had been cutting corners on for years. Evan looked panicked. Brenda whispered to Carlos that this could be bad. But Tom forced a laugh and sent out a department-wide message. "Nothing to worry about, team," he wrote. "We've always passed audits with flying colors. Just make sure your files are organized." I read his message twice and smiled. Tom had no idea what was coming. I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Every document I needed was ready. Every inconsistency was highlighted. Every mistake was recorded. All I had to do was wait. I spent the next 2 weeks meticulously organizing everything I'd collected. Late at night, after Marcus had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and reviewed every piece of evidence. Tom's expense reports with suspicious charges. Vendor contracts approved without proper verification. Compliance forms submitted weeks late. Reports that had been backdated to hide delays. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't need to. Tom had created this mess himself. I simply organized it into a clear, undeniable pattern. I grouped documents by category. I highlighted dates and signatures. I cross-referenced company policies with Tom's violations. The time I finished, I had a comprehensive file that any auditor would find impossible to ignore. I saved everything to a secure drive and waited for the audit to begin. The auditors arrived on a Wednesday morning. They were a team of 3, 2 women and 1 man, dressed in sharp business suits and carrying leather portfolios. They set up in the large conference room and began requesting files. Tom put on his most charming smile and assured them everything was in perfect order. Evan shadowed him nervously, trying to look competent. The rest of us continued working while the audit happened behind closed doors. By the second day, I noticed Tom was sweating more than usual. His confident demeanor was starting to crack. Evan had been called into the conference room twice, and both times he'd emerged looking pale and shaken. During lunch, Brenda whispered that the auditors were asking very specific questions about vendor approvals and expense reports. I nodded but said nothing. Everything was unfolding exactly as I'd hoped. On the third day of the audit, one of the auditors approached my desk. She was the lead investigator, a woman named Patricia with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Allison Price?" she asked. He nodded. "I understand you've been with the company for 20 years, Patricia continued. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about departmental procedures." I followed her to the conference room, my heart pounding but my face calm. She asked about financial tracking systems, compliance protocols, and reporting timelines. I answered every question honestly and thoroughly. Then Patricia asked about vendor approvals. I explained the proper process, the steps that were supposed to be followed. "And has this process always been followed?" she asked, watching me carefully. Paused, choosing my words carefully. "I can't speak for recent months," I said quietly. "But I can show you where the records are kept if that would be helpful." Patricia's eyes brightened. "That would be very helpful. Thank you, Allison." I guided Patricia and her team through our digital filing system, pointing out where various documents were stored. I didn't accuse Tom of anything. I didn't need to. The records spoke for themselves. Patricia pulled up expense reports and frowned. She cross-referenced vendor contracts and made notes. She reviewed compliance submissions and checked the dates. I watched her face change as she discovered inconsistency after inconsistency. "This is concerning," she murmured more to herself than to me. I said nothing. After 2 hours, Patricia thanked me and dismissed me. I returned to my desk, my hands trembling slightly. That evening, Tom was called into a closed-door meeting with Patricia and the other auditors. He was inside for 3 hours. When he finally emerged, his face was ashen and his suit was wrinkled. He didn't look at anyone as he walked quickly to his office and closed the door. The next morning, whispers spread through the department like wildfire. Tom had been asked to provide explanations for multiple compliance failures. Evan had admitted under questioning that Tom had instructed him to approve contracts without proper review. Several vendor payments were under investigation for potential fraud. The auditors had extended their stay by 3 days to conduct a deeper review. Tom arrived late, his eyes bloodshot and his tie crooked. He snapped at Evan for a minor mistake and locked himself in his office. People walked past his door and exchanged worried glances. By noon, corporate sent 2 executives from headquarters. They went straight to the conference room where the auditors were working. Tom was summoned. He walked down the hallway slowly, like a man heading to his execution. I watched from my desk, my expression neutral. Inside, my heart was racing. This was it. Everything I'd worked for. Everything I'd waited for. Tom's empire was finally crumbling. 3 days later it happened. I was at my desk when the head of human resources, a stern woman named Victoria, walked into the department with a security guard. The entire room fell silent. Everyone stopped typing and turned to watch. Victoria walked directly to Tom's office and knocked once before entering. Through the glass walls, we could see her speaking to him. Tom's face went from pale to red. He stood up, gestured angrily, and shouted something we couldn't hear. Victoria remained calm and pointed toward the door. The security guard stepped forward. Tom grabbed his jacket and his briefcase, his hands shaking. Then Victoria escorted him out of his office, through the department, and toward the elevators. It was the same path he'd made me walk 3 months earlier, when he'd announced my demotion in front of everyone. Tom didn't look at anyone as he left. The security guard pressed the elevator button, and they disappeared behind the closing doors. 10 minutes later my phone rang. It was Victoria. "Allison, could you come to the executive floor, please?" she asked. My stomach flipped. I took the elevator up, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I done something wrong? Were they firing me too? When I arrived, Victoria greeted me with a small smile, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. "Please have a seat," she said, gesturing to a chair in her office. I sat down carefully. Victoria folded her hands on her desk and looked at me seriously. The audit revealed significant compliance violations under Tom Whitaker's leadership, she began. "His employment has been terminated, effective immediately." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "We've also reviewed your file," Victoria continued. "Your 20 years of service, your performance reviews, your contributions to this department. Allison, we made a mistake." My breath caught. "We'd like to offer you a promotion," she said. "Senior Operations Manager. It's a step above your previous position, with a significant salary increase and a formal apology from corporate leadership." I walked back to the department in a daze. An email was already circulating through the company. It praised my integrity, my dedication, and my commitment to compliance standards. It announced my promotion and thanked me for my years of service. When I reached my desk, Brenda was waiting with tears in her eyes. "Allison," she cried, pulling me into a hug. "Everyone's talking about it. You're getting Tom's job." Not Tom's job, I thought. Better than Tom's job. Carlos clapped me on the shoulder. Diane brought me coffee. Even Evan approached cautiously and offered his congratulations. "I'm really happy for you," he said quietly. "And sorry for everything." I accepted his apology with a nod. Over the next few days, people stopped by my desk constantly. They shared stories about Tom's mistakes, about how he'd taken credit for their work, about how he'd made their lives difficult. Everyone seemed relieved that he was gone, and everyone agreed that I deserved this promotion. 6 months later, I stood in my new office, the corner office with windows overlooking the city. My team was thriving under my leadership. The department's compliance scores had improved dramatically. Corporate had even used our processes as a model for other divisions. I'd hired 2 new analysts and promoted Brenda to senior analyst. Evan had transferred to another department, where he was reportedly doing much better under different management. I heard through the grapevine that Tom had struggled to find new employment. His reputation in the industry was ruined. I felt no guilt about that. He'd tried to destroy me, and instead he'd destroyed himself. I kept the engraved watch on my desk as a reminder, not of Tom's cruelty, but of my own strength. He'd thought he could humiliate me into silence, but arrogance makes men blind. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about knowing my worth and never letting anyone take it from me. Tom had underestimated me. That was his biggest mistake. And it cost him everything.